Abraham Lincoln became the 16th President of the United States in March 1861. His election came at a very difficult time. The country was deeply divided over the issue of slavery. Many southern states did not want Lincoln as president. They feared he would try to end slavery, which was central to their economy and way of life. Lincoln himself was a man of humble beginnings. He had worked hard to educate himself and rise in politics. He was known for his honesty and his thoughtful way of speaking. People often called him Honest Abe because of his strong moral character and integrity. Lincoln's main goal as president was to keep the United States together as one nation. He believed strongly in the Union. He did not want to see the country split apart. Before he even took office, 7 southern states had already decided to leave the Union. They formed their own government called the Confederate States of America. This was a direct challenge to Lincoln and the federal government. He faced an enormous task. He had to lead a nation that was on the brink of falling apart. His leadership would be tested like no president before him, demanding immense courage and wisdom. During his presidency, Lincoln showed great skill as a leader. He chose a cabinet of strong men, some of whom were his political rivals. He believed it was important to have different voices and opinions around him. This team of rivals, as it has been called, helped him make difficult decisions. He listened carefully to their advice. He was also a powerful public speaker. His speeches, like the Gettysburg Address, inspired people and helped them understand the importance of the Union. He communicated his vision for the country with clarity and conviction, which was essential during such a turbulent period. Lincoln's significance in American history is immense. He is remembered not only for preserving the Union but also for his role in ending slavery. The Emancipation Proclamation issued in 1863 declared slaves in Confederate territory to be free. This was a major step towards ending slavery in the entire country. Lincoln's leadership during the Civil War was crucial. He guided the nation through its darkest hours. His actions and his words continue to inspire people today. He remains a symbol of courage, determination, and the fight for freedom and equality for all people. The Civil War began in April 1861, just a month after Lincoln took office. Confederate forces attacked Fort Sumter, a Union fort in South Carolina. This act of aggression marked the start of the bloodiest conflict in American history. The war was fought between the Union, which was the northern states, and the Confederacy, which was the southern states. The primary cause of the war was the disagreement over slavery. The southern economy depended heavily on enslaved people working on large plantations. The North, on the other hand, was more industrialized and had largely abolished slavery. These fundamental differences created deep divisions. The war was incredibly brutal and lasted for 4 long years. Battles were fought across the country, from Pennsylvania to Mississippi. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers died. Many more were wounded or suffered from diseases. Families were torn apart, with brothers sometimes fighting on opposing sides. The war brought immense suffering to both the North and the South. Cities were destroyed and farms were ruined. The conflict tested the very fabric of American society. It forced people to confront the moral questions surrounding slavery and the meaning of freedom. The scale of the conflict was unprecedented in the nation's history. Lincoln faced many challenges in leading the Union war effort. He had to find capable generals who could win battles. He also had to manage public opinion and keep support for the war strong. This was not easy, as the war was long and costly. There were times when it seemed the Union might not win. Lincoln often felt the immense pressure of his responsibilities. He worked tirelessly, often late into the night, trying to find ways to achieve victory and restore the Union. His determination was a key factor in the North's eventual success. He understood the importance of maintaining morale on the home front as well. The Civil War deeply scarred the nation. Beyond the loss of life, it left a legacy of bitterness and division. The Southern economy was devastated. The institution of slavery, which had existed for over 2 centuries, was finally coming to an end. This was a monumental change. The war also transformed the role of the federal government. It became much more powerful than it had been before. The conflict reshaped the United States in profound ways. The process of healing and rebuilding the nation would take many years, even decades after the fighting stopped. The memories of the war would linger for generations. By early 1865, the tide of the Civil War had turned decisively in favor of the Union. General Ulysses S. Grant, who Lincoln had appointed as commander of all Union armies, was relentlessly pursuing General Robert E. Lee's Confederate Army in Virginia. General William T. Sherman had completed his devastating march to the sea, crippling the South's ability to wage war. The Confederacy was running out of men, supplies, and resources. Its major cities were falling one by one. The Union's superior industrial strength and larger population were proving to be overwhelming advantages in the long and arduous conflict. On April 9, 1865, a momentous event occurred. General Robert E. Lee surrendered his Army of Northern Virginia to General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. This surrender did not officially end the war, as some Confederate forces were still fighting. However, it was widely seen as the effective end of the Confederacy. The news of Lee's surrender was met with great joy and relief in the North. People celebrated in the streets. It seemed that the long and bloody struggle was finally over. President Lincoln was also relieved, though he knew much work remained to heal the divided nation. Lincoln had already been thinking about how to bring the southern states back into the Union. He favored a lenient approach to Reconstruction. He wanted to bind up the nation's wounds and restore peace as quickly as possible. He did not want to punish the South harshly. In his second inaugural address, delivered just a month before the war's end, he spoke of malice toward none, with charity for all. This showed his desire for reconciliation and a peaceful reunification of the country. He believed a merciful approach would be more effective in fostering loyalty and rebuilding national unity. The conclusion of the war brought a sense of hope to many. The Union had been preserved. Slavery was on its way to being completely abolished with the impending ratification of the 13th Amendment. For President Lincoln, it was a moment of triumph, but also one of immense responsibility. He now had to lead the country through the difficult process of Reconstruction. He wanted to ensure that the sacrifices made during the war were not in vain. The future of the nation depended on how it would heal and rebuild itself after such a devastating conflict. The task ahead was daunting, but there was a feeling of optimism in the air. John Wilkes Booth was a well-known actor in the 1860s. He came from a famous family of actors. His father, Junius Brutus Booth, and his brother, Edwin Booth, were also highly respected performers. John Wilkes Booth himself was handsome, charismatic, and popular on stage. He was particularly known for his energetic performances in Shakespearean plays. He traveled extensively, performing in theaters across the country, both in the North and the South. His profession gave him a certain level of public recognition and access to various social circles, which he would later exploit for his dark purposes. Despite his success as an actor, Booth was also a passionate and outspoken supporter of the Confederacy. He fiercely believed in the Southern cause and despised President Lincoln. He viewed Lincoln as a tyrant who was destroying the Southern way of life. Booth was a white supremacist who believed that slavery was a positive good and that black people were inferior. He was deeply angered by the Union's victory in the Civil War and the prospect of emancipation for enslaved African Americans. His political views were extreme, and he often expressed them openly and vehemently among his friends and acquaintances. Booth was not just a sympathizer, he was actively involved in pro-Confederate activities. During the war, he had smuggled medical supplies to the South. He had also expressed a desire to do something more significant for the Confederate cause. He was known for his dramatic flair and his belief that he was destined for some great, albeit infamous, act. His theatrical background perhaps contributed to his grandiose ideas and his desire to make a dramatic statement. He saw himself as a hero who would strike a blow for the South, even as its fortunes were collapsing. As the war drew to a close and the Confederacy faced defeat, Booth's anger and desperation grew. He began to believe that a drastic action was needed to avenge the South. He saw Lincoln as the embodiment of everything he hated about the Union. His hatred for the president became an obsession. He started to gather a small group of co-conspirators who shared his Confederate sympathies and his willingness to engage in violent acts. This group included individuals like David Harold, George Atzerodt, and Lewis Powell. They were all drawn to Booth's charisma and his radical plans. Section 5. A conspiracy takes shape. Booth's malignant intentions. John Wilkes. Booth's initial plan was not to assassinate President Lincoln. Instead, he first conceived a plot to kidnap the president. His idea was to abduct Lincoln and take him to Richmond, the Confederate capital. Booth hoped that by holding Lincoln hostage, he could force the Union government to release Confederate prisoners of war. This, he believed, might help to revive the failing Confederate war effort. He and his co-conspirators made several attempts to carry out this kidnapping plan, but they were unsuccessful. Each attempt was either poorly planned or thwarted by unforeseen circumstances, such as Lincoln changing his travel plans. As the Confederacy's defeat became inevitable, especially after Lee's surrender at Appomattox, Booth's plans became more desperate and violent. The idea of kidnapping Lincoln seemed insufficient to him. He wanted to strike a more devastating blow against the Union government. His hatred for Lincoln intensified, and he began to believe that killing the president was the only way to avenge the South. He also planned to assassinate other key Union leaders, including Vice President Andrew Johnson and Secretary of State William H. Seward. Booth envisioned a coordinated attack that would throw the Union government into chaos. Booth's motives were deeply rooted in his fanatical support for the Confederacy and his white supremacist beliefs. He was enraged by Lincoln's policies, particularly the Emancipation Proclamation and the Union's victory. He saw Lincoln as a tyrant who was destroying the Southern way of life and subverting the Constitution. In a speech Lincoln gave on April 11, 1865, just days before the assassination, the president spoke about granting voting rights to some black men. This speech reportedly infuriated Booth, who was in the audience. He allegedly turned to a companion and said, "That means black citizenship. Now by God I'll put him through." That is the last speech he will ever make. The conspiracy involved several individuals, each assigned a specific role by Booth. Lewis Powell was tasked with assassinating Secretary of State William H. Seward. George Atzerodt was assigned to kill Vice President Andrew Johnson. Booth himself would take on the task of assassinating President Lincoln. Booth believed that these simultaneous attacks would decapitate the Union leadership and inspire a resurgence of the Confederate cause. His co-conspirators were a mixed group of individuals, some deeply committed to the cause, others perhaps less so, but all were drawn into Booth's dangerous orbit. Their plot was a desperate last-ditch effort to strike back at the victorious North. Section 6. The Fateful Day, Washington, D.C., April 14, 1865. April 14, 1865, was Good Friday. It was just 5 days after General Lee's surrender at Appomattox. Washington, D.C. was in a celebratory mood. The long and bloody Civil War was finally coming to an end. President Lincoln was also feeling a sense of relief. He had carried the immense burden of the war for 4 years. That morning, Lincoln held a cabinet meeting where he discussed his plans for Reconstruction and the peaceful reunification of the country. He spoke of his desire for a lenient approach towards the southern states. He seemed optimistic about the future and eager to begin the work of healing the nation. Later that day, President Lincoln and his wife Mary Todd Lincoln decided to attend a performance of the play Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater. They had invited General Ulysses S. Grant and his wife Julia to join them. However, the Grants declined the invitation as they had plans to travel to Philadelphia to visit their children. This change of plans meant that the presidential party would be smaller than anticipated. Major Henry Rathbone and his fiancée, Clara Harris, the daughter of Senator Ira Harris, accepted the Lincolns' invitation to accompany them to the theater that evening. The Lincolns were looking forward to a relaxing evening. John Wilkes Booth learned early on April 14th that President Lincoln would be attending the play at Ford's Theater that night. Booth knew Ford's Theater very well. As an actor, he had performed there many times and was familiar with its layout, including the backstage areas and the presidential box. This knowledge would be crucial to his plan. Upon hearing the news of Lincoln's attendance, Booth quickly finalized his assassination plot. He met with his co-conspirators, assigning them their targets and roles. He believed this was his chance to strike his blow against the Union. Throughout the day, Booth made his preparations. He visited Ford's Theater in the afternoon to prepare the presidential box for his attack. He drilled a small peephole in the door of the box so he could see when the moment was right. He also arranged a wooden bar that could be used to jam the door shut from the inside, preventing anyone from entering after him. He planned his escape route carefully. He arranged for a horse to be waiting for him in the alley behind the theater. Booth was meticulous in his planning, driven by his burning hatred and his desire for infamy. Section 7. Horror at Ford's Theater, The Assassin Strikes. President Lincoln and his party arrived at Ford's Theater at around 8:30 p.m. They were a little late for the start of the play, Our American Cousin. The audience, upon seeing the president, rose and applauded. The orchestra played Hail to the Chief. The Lincolns, along with Major Rathbone and Clara Harris, settled into the presidential box, which was located above the stage to the right. The box was decorated with flags. A guard, John Frederick Parker, was assigned to protect the president, but he reportedly left his post during the intermission to get a drink at a nearby saloon, a decision with tragic consequences. John Wilkes Booth arrived at Ford's Theater around 10 p.m. He made his way to the presidential box. He knew the play well, and timed his entrance for a moment when there would be a big laugh line, hoping the sound would muffle the gunshot. Around 10:15 p.m., during the third act of the play, Booth quietly entered the dark passageway leading to the presidential box. He looked through the peephole he had drilled earlier. Seeing his opportunity, he silently opened the door to the box. President Lincoln was seated in a rocking chair, leaning forward, watching the play intently. Booth stepped into the box, raised his .44 caliber Derringer pistol, and shot President Lincoln in the back of the head at close range. Major Rathbone, hearing the shot and seeing Booth, immediately tried to apprehend him. Booth, however, dropped his pistol and pulled out a large knife. He slashed Rathbone violently in the arm, injuring him severely. Booth then dramatically leaped from the presidential box onto the stage below, a drop of about 12 feet. As he landed, he reportedly shouted "Sic semper tyrannis," the Latin phrase meaning "thus always to tyrants," which is also the motto of Virginia. Some witnesses also heard him shout, "The South is avenged." Despite injuring his leg in the fall, he broke his left fibula. Booth managed to escape across the stage and out the back door of the theater. He mounted the horse he had waiting in the alley and rode off into the night. Panic and chaos erupted inside Ford's Theater. Mary Todd Lincoln screamed. Doctors were quickly summoned from the audience to attend to the gravely wounded president. Lincoln was unconscious and bleeding profusely. It was immediately clear that his wound was mortal. The festive atmosphere of the evening had turned into a scene of unimaginable horror and disbelief. The nation's leader had been struck down. Section 8. A Nation Weeps. The Immediate Aftermath. The news of President Lincoln's assassination spread rapidly through Washington, D.C. and then across the country via telegraph. People were shocked and horrified. The celebrations that had marked the end of the Civil War turned into expressions of grief and outrage. Crowds gathered outside Ford's Theater and later outside the Peterson House, a boarding house across the street where the dying president had been carried. Lincoln was too gravely injured to be moved far. Doctors worked through the night, but there was little they could do. His wound was fatal, the bullet having lodged behind his right eye. President Lincoln died at 7:22 a.m. on April 15, 1865, the morning after he was shot. Secretary of War Edwin M. Stanton, who had been present at Lincoln's bedside, famously remarked, "Now he belongs to the ages." Vice President Andrew Johnson was sworn in as the 17th President of the United States later that morning. The nation was plunged into mourning. Businesses closed and public buildings were draped in black crepe. People wept openly in the streets. The sense of loss was profound, especially for African Americans, who saw Lincoln as their great emancipator and a symbol of hope for a better future. The assassination of Lincoln also triggered a massive manhunt for John Wilkes Booth and his co-conspirators. Secretary of War Stanton took charge of the investigation. Thousands of Union soldiers were deployed to search for Booth. A substantial reward was offered for his capture. Booth, accompanied by David Harold, managed to evade capture for 12 days. They fled south through Maryland and into Virginia, seeking refuge and support from Confederate sympathizers. However, they found little assistance. The South, defeated and exhausted, was not eager to embrace Lincoln's assassin as a hero. Booth was finally cornered in a tobacco barn near Port Royal, Virginia, on April 26, 1865. The barn was set on fire to force him out. Harold surrendered, but Booth refused. He was shot by a Union soldier, Sergeant Boston Corbett, and died a few hours later. Several of Booth's co-conspirators were also arrested. 8 of them were tried by a military tribunal. 4, Mary Surratt, who owned the boarding house where some planning took place, Lewis Powell, George Atzerodt, and David Harold, were found guilty and hanged on July 7, 1865. The swift justice did little to quell the nation's sorrow. Section 9. An Unhealed Wound, the Enduring Impact on America. Abraham Lincoln's assassination had a profound and lasting impact on the United States. It occurred at a critical moment in American history, just as the Civil War was ending and the nation was beginning the difficult process of Reconstruction. Lincoln had favored a lenient and compassionate approach to bringing the Southern states back into the Union. He wanted to heal the nation's wounds quickly and peacefully. His death meant that this vision for Reconstruction would not be fully realized under his guidance. The task fell to his successor, Andrew Johnson, who lacked Lincoln's political skill, wisdom, and moral authority. The loss of Lincoln's leadership was a severe blow to the prospects of a smooth and just Reconstruction. Andrew Johnson's policies were often at odds with the Republican-controlled Congress. This led to bitter political battles, and a much harsher Reconstruction period for the South than Lincoln might have envisioned. Some historians argue that if Lincoln had lived, he might have been able to navigate the challenges of Reconstruction more effectively. He might have been better able to protect the rights of newly freed African Americans and foster a more lasting reconciliation between the North and South. His absence created a vacuum that was difficult to fill. Lincoln's death transformed him into a martyr for the Union cause. He became an even more revered figure in American history. His assassination was seen by many in the North as the final, treacherous act of a defeated and hateful Confederacy. This deepened the bitterness between the North and South, making the process of national healing even more difficult. The memory of Lincoln, the savior of the Union and the great emancipator, became a powerful symbol. His life story, from humble beginnings to the presidency, embodied the American dream and inspired generations of Americans. The assassination of Abraham Lincoln remains a tragic turning point in American history. It not only cut short the life of a remarkable leader, but also altered the course of the nation's development in the post-Civil War era. The challenges of racial equality and national unity, which Lincoln had grappled with, continued to plague the country for many decades. His legacy, however, endures. He is remembered for his unwavering commitment to preserving the Union, his moral courage in confronting slavery, and his vision of a nation united with malice toward none, with charity for all. His assassination left an unhealed wound, but also a lasting inspiration.